For most of our lives, owning a motorcycle meant you decided who fixed it, when it got fixed, and how deep you went into the job. That's starting to change. More bikes now route basic functions through software locks, things like module pairing, resets, and calibrations. Without the right authorization, the bike simply refuses to finish the repair. Shops are running into this already. Owners are paying for the delay. Tonight, we're going to walk through how this system works, who controls it, and why ownership is quietly turning into something that looks a lot more like permission. Stick to the end, because I'm going to show you the exact moment a normal job turns into a dead stop, and what that means for your next service bill. When a repair stops mid-job. 1 minute, the bike is on the stand, warm metal ticking, the smell of oil hanging low. A fastener comes free, a cover lifts, and the job feels familiar, almost automatic. Hands move by memory, then the rhythm breaks. The tool does nothing. The system does not respond. The display flashes a warning that does not explain itself. The engine refuses to cooperate, not because something is broken, but because something invisible says stop. It is the kind of interruption that makes a mechanic pause without swearing. You double-check the connector, you cycle the ignition. You assume a mistake because mistakes are human. But nothing changes. The bike is no longer reacting to effort. It is waiting for permission. The repair has not failed. The process has been halted mid-motion by a boundary you did not know existed. Moments like this used to mean a stripped thread, a bad relay, a worn seal. There was always a cause you could see, hear, or measure. You learned, adjusted, and moved forward. This feels different. The bike is intact. The tools are correct. The experience is there. Yet the work cannot continue, and the reason is nowhere near the workbench. That silence is heavier than any broken part you have faced before in the past. What freezes the hands here is the realization that the stoppage came from somewhere else entirely. The invisible line. You're not supposed to cross. Crossing the line is almost laughably small. It is a step taken without thought for decades. You plug in a tool, you attempt a reset, you access a menu that used to be open. Instantly, the response changes. The screen locks. The system refuses to proceed. There is no warning beforehand, only a digital wall where progress used to be. The machine does not argue or explain, it simply denies. What once felt mechanical now feels conditional. A routine action triggers a refusal that cannot be overridden by patience or experience. You can turn wrenches all night, and it will not matter. The bike is enforcing a rule, and it does so silently, without regard for the person standing over it. This is the moment where confusion deepens, because nothing appears damaged, misaligned, or worn. The refusal is absolute, yet invisible. It feels less like a malfunction and more like a checkpoint. The bike has decided you are not authorized to continue, even though it does not say why. There is no negotiation. The action itself is treated as the problem. That realization changes the tone of the room, because the obstacle is no longer mechanical. It stands between intent and outcome, unmoved by skill or effort applied by anyone present there in that space. That boundary did not originate from the hardware in front of you or the steel beneath. Before we go further, if this information matters to you, support this channel by liking this video, subscribing for future breakdowns, and sharing your perspective below. Why this isn't a skill issue. Skill has always been the currency of a good repair. Years of listening, feeling vibration, knowing torque by hand. In this moment, none of that counts. The system does not measure competence. It checks credentials. You can know exactly what needs to be done and still be blocked from doing it. This is where experience hits a wall that experience cannot climb. Knowledge is present, tools are ready, but permission is missing. The difference matters. One speaks to ability, the other speaks to approval. The machine responds only to the second, ignoring everything else you bring to the bench. That separation is new. In the past, learning closed the gap. You studied, you practiced, you earned the result. Now, the gap stays open by design. It does not matter how much you know if the system does not recognize your right to act. This change quietly rewrites what mastery means. Pride once came from solving problems others could not. Now pride is irrelevant if access is denied. The work becomes less about understanding and more about compliance, which leaves capable hands idle and questions unanswered. It alters the relationship between person and machine in a way that feels fundamentally wrong, because judgment no longer belongs to the operator standing there ready to finish the job. That divide did not appear by accident or neglect. It was drawn with intent from elsewhere. If you're building your kit, check the description. The gear and accessories I recommend are all linked there. The first reaction, nobody talks about. The first feeling is not anger. It is uncertainty. A pause where you replay the steps, wondering what you missed. The shop feels quieter. The confidence that usually carries you through a problem slips, replaced by a sense that the rules have changed without notice. This reaction catches people off guard because it is subtle. There is no loud failure, no obvious cause. Something familiar has been quietly removed. The workbench looks the same. The bike looks the same. Yet the relationship is altered in a way that feels personal. It differs from past frustrations because those had solutions. You could adapt, improvise, or learn. This does not invite that response. It offers no path forward except compliance, and that absence creates a hollow moment before frustration ever arrives. In that quiet space, something important registers. The issue is not a broken part or a lack of skill. It is the feeling of permission being withdrawn after years of trust. That realization lands softly, but it stays. It is unsettling because it hints at permanence. Temporary problems pass. This one feels structural. The sense that something fundamental shifted lingers long after the tools are set down. The change is internal, and that makes it harder to name or dismiss without confronting its source directly and honestly. The explanation emerges once the cause comes into view, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Control built into the machine. Restriction no longer arrives as a warning or an add-on. It is built into the motorcycle from the moment it leaves the factory. Systems that once relied on cables, valves, and mechanical tolerances now depend on software layers that sit between intent and action. Throttle, response, fueling, diagnostics, and even basic calibration pass through code before anything physical happens. That design choice changes the relationship between machine and person. Access points that used to be open now require digital approval. Ports exist, but they do not respond unless a handshake occurs. The bike recognizes the presence of tools, yet waits for authorization before allowing progress. Nothing appears broken because nothing is. The system is simply closed. This approach assumes outside involvement as a default condition. Updates, resets, and confirmations are no longer considered part of ownership. They are treated as services granted temporarily. The machine is designed with the expectation that someone else will always be consulted. Independence is no longer the baseline. What matters is not whether this design is clever or efficient. What matters is that it quietly establishes control at the deepest level. Every action flows through a gate. That gate does not judge skill or intent. It checks permission. Once that architecture is in place, behavior can be shaped without confrontation or explanation. The machine alone does not apply pressure, but prepares ground for enforcement later. Permission as a business model. Control becomes effective when permission turns into a product. Access is no longer assumed with ownership. It is packaged, licensed, and granted through approved channels. Manufacturers decide who qualifies, what tools may be used, and how long that access lasts. The terms are clear even when they are not stated openly. Authorization arrives with conditions. It can expire, it can be revoked, it can be updated without negotiation. Access depends on compliance with rules that sit outside the garage. This structure shifts repair from a right into a privilege. The bike responds not to effort, but to status. Manufacturers occupy the center of this system. They issue credentials, define procedures, and control updates. Service, information flows one direction. When access is granted, it is narrow. When it is denied, there is no alternative route. The decision does not require explanation. This model creates dependency by design. Every interaction reinforces the idea that permission must be requested repeatedly. Even approved access is temporary. It lasts only as long as the terms remain acceptable to the issuer. Ownership becomes conditional. Once permission is treated as inventory, behavior follows. Repair slows, questions increase, control extends outward, shaping how shops operate and how owners plan maintenance. That shift is subtle at first, yet it changes expectations quietly, leaving fewer options available when something goes wrong later without warning or discussion from the people affected most. Where independent repair breaks. Independent repair does not fail all at once. It breaks at a specific point where effort no longer produces progress. A job begins normally. Parts removed, checks, completed. Then, a procedure cannot be finished without access that never arrives. Time stretches, the bike sits, the work stops. Costs begin accumulating before any invoice is written. Labor hours increase while solutions decrease. Shops spend time diagnosing problems they already understand, only to discover they cannot proceed. Calls are made. Waiting replaces wrenching. The delay itself becomes the obstacle. Blocked procedures are the turning point. Certain calibrations cannot be skipped. Certain resets cannot be improvised. Without them, the bike remains incomplete. What was once a straightforward repair becomes a liability. Shops are forced to choose between tying up space or turning work away. This is where harder becomes impossible. Difficulty can be managed. Impossibility cannot. Experience does not shorten the wait. Ingenuity does not bypass the barrier. The system is closed by design, and the closure is enforced consistently. Independent repair collapses not from lack of skill, but from lack of permission. That distinction matters, because it explains why the problem spreads quickly. When one shop cannot proceed, many others face the same halt. The effect is cumulative, eroding confidence slowly until routine service becomes a calculated risk few businesses can afford during normal seasonal work. How the bill quietly shifts. The first cost does not arrive loudly. It shows up as time. Days pass while access is requested. Appointments are rescheduled. What should have been a brief visit stretches into weeks. The delay carries a price long before money changes hands. Small fixes grow expensive through waiting alone. Storage fees appear. Additional labor accumulates. Transport costs increase when bikes must be moved elsewhere. None of these charges reflect additional work performed. They reflect a system that moves slower by design. Ownership absorbs these increases quietly. There is rarely a single line item that explains the jump. Bills rise in increments that seem unrelated until viewed together. What once felt predictable becomes uncertain. Planning maintenance turns into estimating risk. This shift alters decisions. Repairs are postponed. Preventive work is skipped. Some owners choose to live with minor issues rather than face unpredictable costs. Others sell earlier than planned. The market responds to hesitation before explanations ever surface. The financial weight does not stay isolated. It spreads through resale values, insurance considerations, and long-term planning. What began as a delay in a shop reshapes the economics of ownership far beyond repairs. Those secondary effects accumulate quietly, influencing choices about mileage, upgrades, and even whether keeping a motorcycle still makes sense financially when uncertainty replaces the confidence riders once relied on during normal ownership cycles that previously felt stable and worth maintaining long-term. The slow disappearance of hands-on knowledge. For generations, motorcycle knowledge lived in garages, not manuals. Skills moved quietly from one set of hands to another, through observation, repetition, and trust. A younger rider watched an older one work, absorbed habits, and learned by doing. That chain depended on access. When repair stops being personal, that chain weakens without announcement. The loss is not dramatic. There is no single moment where knowledge vanishes. It fades as fewer people are allowed to touch the machine deeply enough to learn from it. When systems close, curiosity stalls. People stop opening things they cannot finish. Teaching moments disappear because the work itself is interrupted before understanding can form. Learning by doing becomes learning by watching, and watching turns passive fast. Without mistakes, there are no lessons. Without trial, there is no confidence. Skills that once felt ordinary become specialized, then rare. No ceremony marks their passing. They simply stop being used. What replaces? That knowledge is not equal. Instructions replace intuition. Authorization replaces judgment. The machine becomes something you interact with, not something you understand. Over time, that shift changes what riders expect of themselves and others. As that understanding thins out, its absence begins shaping value in unexpected places. Why used bikes suddenly feel risky. Used motorcycles have always carried uncertainty, but it was a known kind. Buyers listened for noises, checked records, and trusted their instincts. Restricted repair changes that equation. When access is uncertain, confidence drops. Questions linger longer. Hesitation sets in earlier. Buyers start asking not just what condition a bike is in, but who can still work on it. A well-maintained machine means less if future repairs depend on permission. That uncertainty narrows the pool of interested buyers. Fewer bids appear. Negotiations tilt. Sellers lose leverage quietly. A bike that once moved quickly now sits. Price. Drops do not guarantee interest. Certain models become harder to explain, not because they are unreliable, but because they are locked. The story around them changes. Risk perception matters more than reality. Even when problems are rare, the inability to address them independently weighs heavily. Buyers prefer predictability over promise. They choose machines that feel manageable. Markets adjust faster than habits. Listings reflect caution before riders articulate why. Values shift before explanations catch up. The numbers respond to fear long before people do, setting patterns that take years to reverse once confidence erodes. That hesitation pushes some to respond in quieter, more deliberate ways. If this report helped you see the situation more clearly, subscribe to the channel. Future videos will continue breaking down changes that affect ownership, repair freedom, and long-term costs. With facts and context you will not hear elsewhere today anywhere. Early resistance, quietly, forming. Pushback does not arrive with protests or slogans. It begins in conversations, emails, and closed meetings. Mechanics compare notes. Owners share stories. Patterns emerge. The response stays measured because noise invites dismissal. Small groups begin organizing behind the scenes. They focus on specifics, not outrage. Language matters. Arguments are framed carefully around access, fairness, and precedent. Pressure builds slowly, avoiding a tension that could harden opposition too early. Legal and legislative efforts start narrow, one provision at a time, one exception requested. The goal is not to overturn everything, but to reopen space. Progress is incremental by design. Loud demands risk being labeled emotional. Quiet persistence avoids that trap. This resistance values credibility over speed. It relies on documentation, examples, and patience. The people involved understand the terrain. They have watched other fights fail when they move too fast. The absence of noise does not mean absence of resolve. It reflects strategy. Those pushing back know justification will follow. They are preparing for it, gathering evidence before the narrative shifts in response to their efforts. Once opposition becomes visible, explanations begin appearing with familiar language. When security becomes the explanation, protection enters the conversation as reassurance. Theft prevention is cited first. Safety follows closely. The language sounds reasonable, even responsible. Few argue against security on principle. That makes it effective. Ownership language fades in these explanations. Control is framed as care. Restrictions are described as safeguards. The focus shifts from who owns the machine to who must be protected from misuse. The rider becomes a potential risk rather than a trusted steward. At first, the logic seems to fit. Modern bikes are complex. Mistakes can be costly. Yet the explanation stretches thin when examined closely. Security measures often block legitimate repair without addressing theft meaningfully. Safety claims appear broad, while enforcement remains narrow. Where the story breaks down is consistency. Independent access is restricted even when no risk is present. Authorized channels are favored regardless of context. The justification becomes a blanket, covering decisions that extend beyond protection into control. This pattern feels familiar because it has appeared before in other industries. Security becomes the answer to every question, even when it no longer matches the problem being solved. That recognition hints at a longer history repeating itself. Beyond motorcycles alone, other industries that lost this fight. History offers quiet warnings from industries that traveled this road earlier. Consumer electronics once welcomed tinkering, modification, and local repair. Over time, access narrowed. Parts became serialized. Software locks appeared. Independent shops faded. What followed was predictable. Control expanded because resistance arrived late and fragmented. Once acceptance settled, reversal never came. Agricultural equipment followed a similar arc. Machines grew smarter, access shrank, and repair shifted from fields to authorized bays. Farmers adapted because work demanded it, not because it felt right. Over seasons, dependence normalized, costs rose, timelines stretched. The skills that once solved problems on the spot became secondary to permissions granted elsewhere. In medical equipment, tools locked behind credentials reduced flexibility while increasing expense. The justification sounded familiar. Safety, compliance, protection. Each step seemed reasonable alone. Together, they formed a system that no longer trusted owners or operators. What never returned was independence. Once control embedded itself as standard practice, it became policy through habit. Regulators aligned with what already existed. Industry shaped expectations. The public adjusted. Repair rights did not vanish overnight. They dissolved gradually, leaving little to reclaim when awareness finally caught up. Those precedents matter because they demonstrate how quickly normal becomes permanent once practice hardens into rule, and how difficult reversal becomes when convenience, compliance, and corporate alignment replace personal control without sustained scrutiny from the people most affected by the shift over time alone. Why the rules keep passing. Rules persist because incentives align quietly. Manufacturers invest heavily in shaping outcomes long before votes occur. Lobbying frames restrictions as modernization rather than limitation. Language is polished. Risks are highlighted. Benefits are promised. By the time proposals surface publicly, positions are already hardened. Regulatory bodies respond to what appears orderly and consistent. When industry presents a unified approach, resistance looks disruptive. Alignment becomes easier than challenge. Standards mirror existing systems instead of questioning them. Control feels inevitable once written into guidelines. Riders remain largely absent from these discussions. Representation is thin. Technical voices dominate. Practical experience is sidelined because it lacks institutional polish. Those who live with the consequences rarely sit at the table where terms are drafted. Absence carries weight. Without consistent participation, assumptions go unchallenged. Policies move forward based on theoretical safety rather than lived reality. Each rule reinforces the last, creating momentum that favors continuity. What began as optional becomes default. That progression costs more than money. It costs influence, visibility, and the ability to shape outcomes before they are finalized. Over time, the process rewards compliance and discourages dissent, making late objections appear unreasonable, even when they address real consequences felt far from conference rooms. That imbalance explains why rules keep passing, with little visible resistance until effects are widespread and difficult to unwind, once embedded across markets, cultures, and ownership norms over long periods of time. What ownership looks like going forward. Ownership moving forward feels different because predictability erodes. Costs, once planned annually, now fluctuate without clear cause. Service intervals remain familiar, yet outcomes vary. Dependence replaces confidence when access determines timing and price. Independence once meant choice. You decided when to repair, where to go, and how to prepare. That autonomy shaped long-term relationships with machines. As dependence grows, those relationships shift. Owners become managers of permissions rather than caretakers of equipment. Buyers adapt by changing priorities. Simpler machines gain appeal. Proven platforms hold value. Complexity invites caution. Decisions tilt toward what can be maintained without negotiation. The market begins sorting itself along those lines. Some will accept dependence for convenience. Others will avoid it deliberately. Both paths involve trade-offs. What matters is awareness. Ownership no longer means the same thing it once did. Understanding that shift early allows decisions to be made with intention rather than surprise. Long-term planning changes accordingly, affecting mileage expectations, upgrade choices, and resale timing. The sense of control that once defined ownership becomes conditional, reshaping how commitment to a motorcycle is measured over years rather than seasons. That recalibration influences loyalty, maintenance habits, and the willingness to invest emotionally in machines that may no longer feel fully owned. Expectations shift quietly across garages, shops, and riding circles. Norms adjust without announcement. What once felt permanent begins to feel leased in spirit, if not in name. The effects compound slowly. Few anticipate the long-view consequences until distance provides clarity, revealing how subtle changes altered relationships, decisions, and identity tied to ownership over time broadly, the line that hasn't been crossed yet. The remaining question is not technical, it is temporal. Where acceptance hardens into permanence matters. Once enough people adjust, reversal becomes theoretical. Attention fades. What felt urgent settles into routine. Normalization happens quietly. The first denial feels shocking. The 10th feels expected. Eventually, no one remembers alternatives clearly enough to argue for them. That moment marks a threshold that rarely receives ceremony. Awareness matters before that threshold is crossed. Debate has influence only while outcomes remain flexible. Afterward, discussion turns historical. Choices narrow. The window closes without announcement. This does not resolve itself automatically. Systems persist unless challenged early and consistently. Silence is interpreted as consent. Convenience fills the gap left by resistance. The unresolved tension sits here. Ownership still carries meaning, but its boundaries are shifting. Whether those boundaries continue moving depends on what is noticed and questioned now, before habits fully form. There is no slogan to end on, only the recognition that lines drawn quietly are hardest to erase once they become ordinary. The future remains undecided precisely because it has not been fully acknowledged. That space allows reflection, restraint, and reconsideration, but only if attention holds long enough to matter. What follows depends less on technology and more on vigilance, memory, and the willingness to question slow change before it hardens into default. History shows how quickly convenience becomes permission, and permission becomes expectation. Those patterns are still forming here. The choices are not closed yet, but they are narrowing. Nothing guarantees the outcome. There is only awareness, timing, and the decision to notice shifts while they remain reversible instead of accepting them later as unavoidable facts after habits set in permanently over time. None of this is about hating new bikes. It's about keeping ownership real. If your last service turned into a waiting game, you already felt it. The line between repair and permission is moving, and it's moving fast. If this breakdown helped, hit like so more riders see it, subscribe for the next deep dives, and tell us what you're seeing at your dealer or in your garage.